I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're listening to the only story that matters. This is true oral storytelling, written to be performed and recorded in one single, flawless take. This episode of SKALD is the best episode yet, so don't worry about starting at the beginning. Instead, dive right in here. Afterward, if you want to find out what you missed, you can do just that by listening to the previous episodes or by picking up the prose volumes on Amazon. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 53. Maul shook his head, fighting to disperse the fog that blanketed his shattered mind. 100 years? 100 years? You lie. Maul rose from his bunk, towering over the wizard Patro. I should tear your tongue from your liar's mouth. I should gouge your clever eyes from your skull. Maul spoke softly, so as not to draw the attention of the proctors. But still, his voice dripped with bile and menace. The old wizard shuffled backward as quickly as his ancient legs would carry him, desperate to get away from the savage, the awful brute, the murderous oaf that loomed over him. You cost me a trip home. You cost me Skog. You cost me everything. Maul moved forward steadily, his teeth grinding, his lip quivering. And as he did, Patro was forced back against a bunk, his retreat cut off. He had nowhere else to go. And with no other option, with no way out, the old wizard did the only thing he could do. He went to lean upon his magics, and he reached two fingers quickly, but gently, up toward Maul's temple. Don't you touch me! Maul seized Patro's hand, squeezing so hard that the wizard could feel the bones of his wrist grinding together, could hear them cry out while under assault from the relentless power of the one true king of men, the one true king of flames and ashes. I've had enough of your magics, old man. More than enough. Maul placed his big, broad, meaty hand upon Patro's sunken chest and slid it slowly upward. Slid it up to the point where the wizard could feel his assailant's palm brush against his protruding Adam's apple. Tell me why I shouldn't squeeze, why I shouldn't take your worthless life, as you have taken so much from me, as I've had everything taken from me. Speak, or I'll assume there is no reason. Speak! Patro, the old wizard, swallowed hard, and then did as he was commanded, as his king had commanded him to. Because if you do, then the proctors will take you. And I assure you, I promise you, that they can always find something else to take from you. Maul wrangled his hate. He reined in his fury. He mastered his rage. Though it pained him, He choked down the urge to kill the wizard, his fellow slaves, and every proctor he could lay hands upon. Though denying that urge pained him, Patro's words had reminded him of something that pained him far, far more. The emptiness, the lacking, the void left by the proctor's grisly surgery. He glanced over his shoulder, glanced back to where they stood, where the proctors stood, where they guarded over the slaves' quarters with their whips, their spears, and their staves. And the wizard, he wasn't wrong. He was absolutely right. Even now, they had seen Maul rise to his feet, had seen him advance upon Patro, and Maul could see the readiness in their posture. He didn't need magic to see what his future held if he acted upon his gruesome, rage-filled desires. Maul wanted to kill the wizard, to slaughter the slaves, to take revenge upon the proctors who had butchered him. But he could not. He knew that he could not. The fire was missing from his gut. His fire had been extinguished, and so the proctor's surgery, their macabre vivisection, had accomplished that which the wizard's magics could not, what the high elf's punishment could not, what the efforts of the pharaoh could not, what a lifetime of torment and agony could not. They had tamed King Maul. So he took his hand from the wizard's chest. He looked down, he clenched his teeth, and he clenched his fists, forcing the directionless hate back down into the core of his being, back down where it belonged, back to where it festered for as long as he could remember. You sent me to that hell, to that broken world. For what? The wizard began breathing slightly easier as he lowered himself down upon the bunk behind him. If I remember correctly, you had stormed into my home, looking to steal from me at my brother's command. I would think that I was well within my rights. Maul spoke with a deep growl. Don't you talk to me about rights. What about my rights? The rights of a king. And what does his brother talk? I've only seen you in the tavern, in your home, and now where you belong, in chains. The wizard smiled sadly. We are brothers, Henno and I. Twins, identical. Though we could not be more different. Maul winced, suffering the effects of his broken mind as he struggled to make sense of what the wizard told him. Then where's your brother? Where is Henno now? Patro frowned. He is as he must be, as exalted as I am degraded, as elevated as I have been debased. It is as it has always been with Henno and me, for the past 100 years, as it was for the centuries before. Maul spat. 100 years. 100 years? Do you take me for a fool? The wizard grinned. Though you choose to play one far, far too often. No, I do not. Time passes differently between the sundered worlds. You must have known that. Maul sputtered. But even then, you were old. You and your brother, you were ancient. The wizard nodded slowly. And we are far, far more ancient than you even realize, my king. With age comes wisdom, and it is that wisdom that I hope to impart to you. Forget your wisdom and impart to me this. You exiled me from this realm. You cast me into that dark, the dying world. Why? Why did you send us there? Petros sighed. I already told you. You broke into my home. You meant to steal from me at my brother's command. Maul, heedless of the watching proctors, allowed his voice to rise in frustration. Don't you play stupid with me. You said you sent me there to learn something, to learn the difference between what I want and what I need. And right now, all I want, all I need, is to tear your throat out with my teeth! The wizard stood quickly, and he spoke lowly. Quiet now. Be quiet. Keep that up, and the proctors will be upon you. They'll be upon us both. And where would that get us? Maul, though he hated to admit it, knew that the wizard was right. Though he would have rather played the fool, though he would have rather been the brute, been the maelstrom of violence he knew he could become. He knew that Patro was right. Now wasn't the time, though the time would come. Sooner or later, the time must come. It's been a long time. 100 years in a lifetime that spans far, far, far more than that. I can't remember every conversation from the eons of my existence. And besides, Petros smiled knowingly. If you don't know if you learned it, then you must not have learned it. Maul lowered his brows. Even with the proctors watching, there's a limit to how many of your riddles I'll suffer through, old man. The wizard laughed wryly. I believe it. I believe it well. But the time for suffering is almost through. If you wish for it to be. Maul, do you wish to end it? What kind of question is that? Of course I wish to end my suffering, to free myself from this bondage. The wizard grinned. Then you accept my offer. The offer to help you. The offer to pool our considerable talents and our limited resources. Now it was Maul's turn to laugh, bitterly. You expect me to work with you? You expect me to trust you? After what you did? After what you cost me? The wizard shook his head. You were right. You haven't learned a thing. As it always must, the past has passed us by. Suddenly, the wizard's eyes flashed with a brilliant white light, not unlike that which had transported Maul to that dying, broken, now completely shattered world. Do you wish to have a future, Maul? Think hard before you answer, because now, here, in this world, in the real world, I am the only one who can give you that future, who can give you your freedom, who can send you on your way to the destiny that was promised you. Maul set his jaw, and he did as the wizard requested. He thought. He thought hard, thought exceptionally hard, hard enough that his head ached as the shards of his broken mind clashed together. He thought about what the wizard had taken from him, of what the proctors had taken from him, thought about what he had lost and what he could never regain. He thought about SKALD, his sweet pet, the one who was forever lost to him. He thought about all that he had lost, and then he thought about what he might gain. He thought about what was still his to claim, still his to take, the ultimate, inevitable victory that was still his to seize from the jaws of defeat. He thought upon his blood, he thought upon his home, his world, and the throne that sat at its head. He thought about the throne, his throne, and how he would take it, how he would sit upon it, how he must sit upon it, as the sundered worlds were burnt to ashes and cast into darkness. He thought exceptionally hard. And when he was done, he looked reluctantly at Patro, looked that grinning wizard dead in the eye, and he spoke. What do I do? The Pharaoh traveled as they always did, by the green ways, by the secret passageways that only they knew, by the portals their shamans wrenched open in those ancient trees. They tumbled through the green, surrounded by the sounds of crinkling leaves and spreading moss, sliding along the passageways that crisscrossed that entire realm. But eventually, their expeditious passage came to an end. In the old days, they could use the greenways, use those mysterious, obliging trees to travel most anywhere within that border realm. But that was almost 100 years ago, back before Hanno's ascendancy, before he cast down his twin brother Patro, who had ruled benevolently from the shadows, before Hanno declared himself sorcerer king of Ravenna and banished all magics but his own from his ever-growing domain. When he had first seized control of the city, the largest the Pharaoh knew of in that border realm, they had thought him just another in a long line of blustery but ineffectual leaders. Men in the purest expression of their humanity, vicious demagogues willing to say and do anything to seize the power that they wished to define them. And so, the Pharaoh had made a choice. They walled themselves off in the arbor as they always had, and they simply waited for this newest leader to tire, to weaken, and to fade. But now, it was nearly 100 years later, and Hanno, that vicious sorcerer king, had only grew in power. And as his grasp upon Ravenna tightened, Hanno could expend his energies elsewhere, could use his considerable and still growing powers to extend his tendrils, to reach out and infect more of that border realm with his noxious disease. Year by year, decade by decade, the city of Ravenna consumed all that surrounded it, devoured field, forest, stream, and mountain as Hanno's people multiplied, unchecked. Though Hanno called them his people, she, the queen of the Pharaoh, knew them for what they truly were: slaves. Even the ones who professed themselves not to be, especially the ones who professed themselves not to be, they were all slaves, made to believe that their life was one that they had chosen for themselves. And on the backs of those slaves, with their bones a foundation, with their blood, sweat, and tears as fuel, Henno had turned Ravenna into a mighty city-state, a massive, ever-growing, ever-changing monstrosity that consumed all that entered, consumed all that it touched, producing two things and two things only: more power for Henno and more misery for his slaves. And that power flowed in a vicious, unbreaking circle, enabling that ravenous sorcerer king to claim more and more land for his own. And as he did, his slaves rushed in, eager to get to work, eager to prove themselves willing accomplices, to prove to Henno and themselves that they were more than just slaves. So they set to work. They tore down the trees, they tore up the ground, and they shattered the greenways that the Pharaoh had used for generations, the ones that they had used since first arriving in the barrier realm, the very greenways that they had used to travel there from their home world, the elf realm. And with no greenways to carry them, the Pharaoh were reduced to this: traveling simply, crudely, traveling like humans, placing one foot in front of the other, and walking. But though Henno's magics continued to stretch outward, though his influence on the land surrounding Ravenna grew at an exponential rate, he had not yet been able to lay claim, to lay true claim, to all of it. No, there was one holdout. There was one region that not even Henno's awful magics could truly, completely conquer. Because when Henno's magic first arrived, when his aura first stretched out far enough to touch that land, the trees had already been destroyed, and the living creatures had fled or perished as something heinous and unnatural made that land its home. As an abomination took root. And it was there. It was that region, that awful no-man's land, that the queen of the Pharaoh looked out upon, gazing in disgust at the decay that rippled through the very earth itself, wrinkling her nose in disgust at the rot that wafted up from those barren plains. The region was constantly growing and shifting along with the capricious monster that made its home there, the unbeatable juggernaut that wallowed there in its filth, its degradation, its misery, and its loathing. The monster's territory was too wide, too large, too unpredictable. They could not go around it. They didn't have time to go around it. Henno had sent word that he had it in his possession. Somehow he had tracked down that brute, that savage, that oaf, that murderer Maul, and most importantly, he had laid his hands upon that dread weapon, that long, twisting, alabaster horn. In the words of that epistle, Henno had let them know that he had the horn, that he was willing to trade, to make a deal, but between the words lay a threat and a promise that they weren't the only prospective buyers, and that time was of the essence. So though it pained her to admit it, Queen of the Pharaoh knew the truth. Their path was clear. Their path was inarguable, and it yawned out terrifyingly before them. They must take the most expedient route. They must go through that abhorrent land. If it was just her, Her and her retinue, her attendants, her hand-picked warriors. That would have been one thing. They would have run hard and run fast. They would have made astounding time. They would have escaped the monster's wasteland before it even knew that they were there. But it was not just her. It was not just her and her warriors. She looked back at the royal palanquin, balanced upon the shoulders of the arbor's strongest young pharaoh. No. They had someone else to think about. And that's why she had brought them. It was a cruel, merciless decision, but it was a decision that had to be made. And is that not the essence of leadership? To make the decisions that, though they pain you, though they cause the suffering of the few, still work to elevate the many? She didn't know the answer. She tried to reassure herself that it was true, that she had made the right choice in bringing them along. They were the old, the wounded, and the infirm. They had slowed the party's pace, slowed it so much that her advisors had urged her to send them back, to spare them the grim fate that awaited them. But she had stood by her dire decision, her deadly decree. As they ran through the monster's territory, as they powered through, desperate to reach the other side, to reach the comparative safety of developed, of civilized Ravenna. Her elders, her wounded warriors, they would all serve one final purpose. They would act as bait. Their pace had also been slowed by the palanquin itself, slowed far more than she had even expected. There would be no way to make it through without suffering heavy, heavy losses. But the palanquin, no, it was too terrible to even consider. The palanquin could not be taken. It could not be lost. The monster needed to be distracted. The abomination needed to feed. It needed to turn its awful, countless, undulating eyes to something other than the queen of the pharaoh, other than her essential, priceless guard, and other than the royal palanquin that they protected at all costs. So yes, she had made that decision. She had condemned the old and the infirm to death. She had marched them through the wilderness at spear point when necessary, and she had brought them here to the edge of that desolate wasteland where they would meet their terrible, inevitable death. And the best, the absolute best that they could hope for was that their end would come quickly, and that their journey into the inky black void of nothingness would be one last final gift to their queen and to their people. She commanded her warriors to unsheathe their weapons. She commanded the pharaoh holding the palanquin to steel themselves for the horrors that lay ahead. And she sadly, but firmly, ordered them, the sick, the old, and the infirm, ordered them to march ahead and serve their people proudly. And then, after a deep, sorrowful breath, the queen of the pharaoh led her people into that corrupted wasteland, the area that the abomination had held and defiled for 100 years. The land of the Feldren. I hope you're digging SKALD. If you are, please give the show a good review on iTunes, as it's the best way to get the word out about the only story that matters. Mr. Mist 231 says, the most unique fantasy story I've heard in years. I can't recommend this podcast enough. If you're at all into the fantasy genre, then SKALD is for you. This masterfully composed sword and sorcery epic truly is the only story that matters. So don't waste any more time and venture forth into the sundered worlds, where you'll hear an excitingly fresh and unique exploration of your favorite fantasy tropes. I bring SKALD to you each week thanks to the support of SKALD fans on Patreon. SKALD is completely free and completely free of ads. If you enjoy the show, do the right thing. Head to patreon.com/SKALD and sign up to actually start paying for your favorite podcast. It's safe, secure, easy, and painless. I promise. Please talk about SKALD on social media, and make sure to tag me so I can share your posts. I'm Aubrey Sitterson on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and Snapchat. You can also hit up aubreysitterson.com for links to everything, including SKALD, my wrestling talk show Straight Shoot, bio, contact information, and more, including 2016's best comic book, Street Fighter G.I. Joe, in stores right now. This week's recommendation is a comic, and no, it's not one of mine. It's Space Riders by Alexis Zirit and Fabian Rangel Jr. It's a heavy, badass, psychedelic black poster of a science fiction book. It's weird, fast-paced, violent, and gorgeous, with absolutely stunning color choices and mind-numbing backgrounds. It's like a book made for Aubrey. Don't worry about getting single issues, just go ahead and buy the entire collection. It's worth it. If you like SKALD, you're going to love Space Riders. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.